Hello everybody and welcome back to LRN. Today a really interesting episode as we look at all of the news coming out of the paddock in the F1 over this weekend and the last few days, suggesting that there could be massive repercussions for two teams over cost cap breaches from the 2021 season. We'll go through why that is, what's been said and the implications of this happening. First of all, though, if you are new around here, please make sure to subscribe on the bottom right hand side. Really helps the channel out, and make sure to like the video if you do enjoy it. But we'll get straight into it then, and we'll get into it by first of all just discussing. So the rumours are that the two teams involved in the cost cap, who've gone over the cost cap, are Red Bull Racing and Aston Martin. They are the main two teams being mentioned, and the understanding is that Aston Martin have gone over a little bit, and that Red Bull have gone over a lot. And the way that this is determined is that you have a $145 million cost cap. And if you are to go over a little bit, that means that you've made a minor infraction on the cost cap and you've spent less than 5 million extra. So your total spend will come in at less than $150 million. And then you could have a material impact to the amount that you've spent. And the way they consider that is anything spent over $5 million extra. So that's $150 million plus. Now, the understanding is that Red Bull have spent way in excess of the $145 million cap, putting them over the $150 million limit and into the material section of the regulations and the potential penalties for spending over $150 million. Now, this is a really serious offence. It's something that needs to be taken very seriously. So the statement from the FIA at this time is the FIA is currently finalising the assessment of the 2021 financial data submitted by all F1 teams. Alleged breaches of the financial regulations, if any, will be dealt with according to the formal process set out in the regulations. The FIA notes significant and unsubstantiated speculation and conjecture in relation to this matter and reiterates that the assessment is ongoing and due process will be followed without consideration to any external discussions. So the key thing here, I'm sure you'll all be aware that we've had comments from Toto Wolff, from multiple team owners, from Ferrari specifically as well, coming out and basically saying that they're aware of the issue and that the just punishments need to be made. And those punishments, of course, what they're hoping for are points deductions, which is where our headline comes in of Hamilton being an 8-time champion. Because what we're looking at for Aston Martin, who have spent less than 5 million extra, the understanding is generally they'll get a bit of a slap on the wrist. It's likely to be a financial penalty. And if there was a sporting penalty in terms of points, it would likely be minimal. Now, whether or not that's just, it's up for debate. If you talk to Toto Wolff and his comments here, the cost cap is probably the most important evolution of regulations in order to keep a level playing field. And watching him talk during the coverage on Sky Sports, you'll get an understanding that every single penny extra spent over that budget is a huge benefit and advantage to the team that does it. So what he basically said is if it turns out that you can spend up to $5 million extra and only get a slap on the wrist, that is actually a huge gain. So he thinks most teams will end up on purpose overspending on the cap because they know they can essentially get away with it, and the benefit will really outweigh the negatives in terms of what they'll gain in performance and points through a season by spending the extra 5 million, the extra points and upgrades that could bring through certain stages of the year are massively more beneficial to them than the worry of what the punishment may be. So the question then comes down to, will the FIA, therefore listening to that, understanding that it will cause teams to potentially start breaking the cost cap on purpose, will they have to set a precedent then, having listened to these teams talk, Toto Wolff talk specifically, will they have to set a precedent with Red Bull and Aston Martin and go, we're going to really punish you here? Just to prevent other teams and yourselves in future from repeating these these errors and from going over the cost cap that we've put in place. The idea of the cost cap, of course, is to keep teams closer in the field. It's to prevent teams with the resources of a Mercedes and a Ferrari going and spending hundreds of millions of dollars that teams like Williams and Haas simply don't have access to in the development of their cars. So, and of course we want to see that. We want to see a close grid. As fans, we want them to be closer together. So if it turns out that a team like Red Bull have gone and spent a huge amount of money extra over what they were allowed to do, and that turned out to be the reason they managed to upgrade their car, have the performance they did, and therefore win the 2021 World Championship, I think it's only justified and it is only fair that points are deducted. And when you take into consideration that Max Verstappen finished the World Championship only 8 points above Lewis Hamilton, if you take, and you can, and obviously the investigations are ongoing and we need to wait for how those, what the findings are before any firm decisions or opinions are made. But of course, we're running on the rumours here, and the rumours are, of course, that Red Bull have gone way over the budget. So if that has happened, and Mercedes, as an example, have stayed within the budget, within the $145 million allowed to be spent, and let's say Red Bull have spent $10 million more, that $10 million will easily have equated to those 8 points gained by Max Verstappen. The upgrades it would have brought, the extra parts it would have brought, any extra research that it's allowed them to do through the course of that season and benefited them into this season as well. Because if they've gone, as a rule, we're just going to overspend, we don't think the punishment's going to be that bad, so let's just crack on with it. That's going to be one of the reasons why they've come into this season so well prepared, because they've just been spending more money than everybody else. Now, as I say, that is hearsay at the moment, but that is potentially what's been going on, and definitely, in my opinion, we need to see a huge repercussions and penalty for Red Bull if that's the case. And as I said, it can't just be a fine, because they will have essentially bought the World Championship by outspending others against the rules. And so in my opinion, I don't think there's any other way you can do it. If they are found guilty of going over the 5 million, so they've therefore gone into the material breach of the regulations and spent more than $150 million, and therefore massively outspent everybody else on the grid, I don't think you can approach it any other way than to give them a points deduction, give the drivers a points deduction, a significant one, which would therefore hand Lewis Hamilton his 8th World Championship. They could even be excluded. One of the things listed in the material breach is that they could be excluded from the championship altogether. And, so if you consider the fact that that's on the table, if they didn't do that and they went for a points deduction, there's no way it's going to be less than 8 points, right, for Max Verstappen. So it would, by definition, hand Lewis Hamilton his 8th World Championship. And I'm sure, he might have expected, to be fair, to get it anyway after the investigations that were going on at the end of last season. But of course that didn't happen. But for it to end up happening like this, if it does turn out that Red Bull have been overspending, despite what Christian Horner says, you've got to take everything Christian Horner says with a pinch of salt. I do not really... He's great for his team. He's great at what he does. He's great at deflecting. But he does come out with some utter nonsense sometimes, as do they all, to be fair. But he does. And you just have to expect... You have to hope the FIA come through on their own rules of what those punishments will be. And fair enough to Aston Martin. If it turns out they've breached it, and they've breached it by 50p, it's still a breach, so they're still going to be listed. So you can understand if they only get a bit of a slap on the wrist and have to pay a penalty, right? But to spend over $5 million more, that's not an accident. They have accountants. They'll be fully aware of the money being spent. That will be a choice. That will be them deciding, we're going to spend more than the cap. We don't believe they're going to inflict any serious punishments, and we are going to win, is the way that I perceive it. Let me know in the comments below what you think. If you agree that or maybe you really do think they just accidentally did it, which, to be honest, I just cannot fathom how that could possibly be the case in such a professional outfit, though of course they do pride themselves on being more of an independent company than other teams who work like corporate organizations. Well, maybe this is why corporate organizations are better. They can keep better track of their finances, though I suspect that isn't the case. I suspect Red Bull have indeed knowingly overspent. Maybe they spent a little bit more than they planned, or something happened along the way, and because of the way they decided to go ahead with their spending, it just caused them an issue, an unforeseen problem down the line. Maybe it came about like that. But either way, if you have spent significantly more than other teams, it gives you a significant advantage, not just off the grid, but on the grid. In performance, race to race, points will have been won throughout the season, especially towards the end when all of the upgrades are in, which they would not have won otherwise. And with that in mind, if this turns out to be true, that they have spent more than the $5 million extra and had a material impact on their performance last season, and it will, and this is going across the 21, and as Toto Wolff said, it will also benefit them into 22 and 23, so the punishments need to be huge and also need to be considered for now. But if it has happened, if they have breached those regulations, they need to be points deducted, and Lewis Hamilton rightly needs to be handed his 8th world championship and make Max Verstappen again need to fight for his first championship, which I'm sure he will get this season. But will that be taken from him as well? We don't know the extent of the spending issues. We don't know how much of a problem this is going to cause Red Bull. If it turns out all of these allegations are true, it could end up impacting them this season as well and into next. So definitely one to keep an eye on. But for Lewis Hamilton, some people will argue it's justice served. Some people will argue, I'm sure, if you're a Red Bull fanboy, that it's a witch hunt and people are out to try and put them down or whatever you want to say. But at the end of the day, I don't care if you're a Red Bull fan or a Mercedes fan or Ferrari fan, or if you're just an F1 fan. If you want the teams to be close together, if you want to see close fighting, close-knit, multiple teams going for the championship, just going for race wins, every team needs to stick to these regulations. Every team needs to stay with that $145 million cap, so that we can have an opportunity for everyone to be closer on the grid. Now, I'm not expecting every team to suddenly turn into IndyCar or A1 racing from back in the day where everything's even, right? We don't want that. We do want ingenuity, like Adrian Newey's done with their Red Bull this season. It's been absolutely awesome what he's done with that car. Of course, it's unfortunate just how much better it's turned out to be than the others, but again, has their amount they've been spending led into that. But anyway, even looking at the Ferrari, the design of that car is amazing. I love what they've done with their side pod design. It is absolutely awesome. And I'm glad to see all these different innovations, and I hope over the next couple of seasons we don't start to see all those cars sort of become looking a bit samey as the teams that are winning, everyone starts to copy. I don't want that. I want it to remain that you get all these ingenious designs and they just end up being really closely matched. That would be ideal. I love seeing differently designed cars on the grid. But as I said, if it turns out that the issues that they have breached these regulations, punishments need to be made. No matter whose side you're on, in general, you need to be, as a fan of F1, on board that if someone's going to breach the rules and breach them significantly, which is the allegation against Red Bull, punishments need to be made. And if it turns out they have essentially bought the F1 2021 Drivers' Championship, it needs to be taken away from them and given to people that stayed within the rules and therefore rightly won that title, which would of course be Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. And as I said, if you are new around here, please make sure to subscribe on the bottom right hand side. Hopefully you're going to enjoy the race this weekend. Really looking forward to Singapore and the race ahead. So I will be back tomorrow with a reaction to the Singapore Grand Prix. So make sure to subscribe, hit the bell icon and be notified when that video goes up. Otherwise, I'm just going to thank you so much for watching the video today. Again, I really want to know what you think, so do get in the comments below. I hope you have a great day. Goodbye.